Hi there, I'm Adam McDermott. Dead Space 2 and I go back a long time. I bought it the week it came out, but only after 3 years and several attempts did I actually beat it, despite the fact that the first Dead Space is one of my favourite games. Recently I've gotten the Platinum trophy in the sequel and I still have strong feelings about it. Mostly negative. This is my personal experience with Dead Space 2. As I said, the first Dead Space is one of my favourite games. I adored the atmosphere, enemies, story, combat, just everything. I remember sitting in the darkness, proceeding with trepidation one chapter at a time. That world sucked me in completely to the point where it felt like I was stranded, trapped and trying to survive on the USG Ishimura. After triumphantly beating it, I immediately started a New Game Plus, eager to relive one of the best gaming experiences of my life. So when Dead Space 2 was released, you can imagine my excitement. I noticed that a few changes were made for the sequel. For starters, Isaac Clarke is no longer a silent protagonist. He also controlled differently. The camera could be rotated faster and moving Isaac was less cumbersome. The other notable change was the amount of enemies I was facing. During the first 20 minutes of Dead Space 1, I killed 7 enemies. For Dead Space 2, it was 15. As I continued, that ratio grew larger. After my first hour, I realised that I wasn't playing a horror game. I was playing an action game with horror overtones. Suddenly, the changes to Isaac's movement made sense. He is so responsive because there are more enemies to face, but that wasn't a good thing. It felt like I was killing far too often. Cautiously moving through the depraved world of Dead Space was a thing of the past. Now I was numb to the horror because of blasting necromorphs all the time. By chapter 5, fatigue was setting in. Sure, the body count is nowhere near the levels of Call of Duty or Battlefield, but it felt excessive for Dead Space. Another issue I had was the story of Isaac battling with hallucinations while some lady promises to cure him if I can reach her. I didn't find it anywhere near as interesting as trying to uncover what happened and why everyone is dead on the Ishimura in the first game. Of course, then there is the matter of Isaac talking. Visceral Games said because Isaac meets more people, they wanted him to converse with them in order to make the world believable. In the first game, there wasn't anyone around for him to speak with, other than his 2 crew members who were often on the other side of the ship. I understand the logic behind letting him speak, but I didn't like the fact that it changed a fundamental reason why the first game was so appealing. Isaac is me. It is not Isaac slowly walking through decrepit hallways. I am. Isaac isn't all alone trying to stay alive. That's me. Bringing in more characters and constructing a story where Isaac has a back and forth with them ruined the immersion. Now Isaac is just some guy. It is no longer my story of survival, it is his. So the story was unappealing and I was getting a little bit exhausted from all the shooting. The end of chapter 5 was my breaking point. This cutscene encapsulated all that I didn't like about Dead Space 2. Isaac talking and too much action. I also found it a little insulting. Isaac Clarke is an engineer, not Superman. Look how many ridiculous close calls he avoids. First, the aircraft shoots 1,000,000 bullets that kills everyone else but consistently misses Isaac. You can even see the spray all around him, but not a single bullet ever hits. Then he has the athleticism and reaction time of Usain Bolt. Oh, watch out, the aircraft is back with its terrible aim. Ah, how lucky that he smashed into it when he was sucked out into space instead of just floating off into eternal darkness. Oh, look out for the brute that also sucks at killing you. Time for the grand finish. Big explosion followed by him crashing through a window at breakneck speeds, causing him not even a smidgen of harm. What did I just watch? Annoyed by all of this, I turned it off and stared blankly at the screen, consumed by disappointment. Why did they have to change so much of what made the first game special? I took solace in the fact that while Dead Space 2 went in a direction that I detested, at least I still have Dead Space 1. While booting it up again with no real goal in mind, other than to be reminded of just how much I adore it, the game started loading trophies. I had seen this happen countless times, but only at this moment did I pay attention. A reason to replay it emerged. Forget the sequel and its over-the-top action, I was going to platinum Dead Space 1. Reinvigorated, I now had a new set of challenges, helping extend the lifespan of one of my favourite games. This is where my appreciation for trophies started. 20 hours later, I had unlocked my first real platinum trophy. The actual first was for Madden 11, but the trophies in that game are laughably easy. With Dead Space, I had to make an effort, and the platinum trophy felt earned, like an accomplishment. If it wasn't for Dead Space 2 pushing me back to the first game in search of a reason to replay it, I might never have gotten the platinum. I might never have understood the beauty of trophies, how they can prolong a game's lifespan, giving us an excuse to keep playing our favourite titles. Without Dead Space 2, there might never have been an episode of Platinum Journey. On a high from platinuming Dead Space, I decided to give the sequel another shot. For a little while, I was able to separate my desire for what I wanted it to be versus what it was. An action game with horror overtones instead of a horror game with action sprinkled in like its predecessor. I even started to enjoy it. This school section in Chapter 6 is brilliant. There is something naturally creepy about empty schools at night. Its bright and vibrant colours contrast the metallic and dark feel of the majority of the sprawl rather nicely. While leaving, the first smile crossed my face during my time with Dead Space 2 when I heard this. It punctuated the creepiness and enjoyment of that section. I began to realise that while the game does focus more on action, said action is quite good. Isaac is capable of moving swiftly, allowing me to dodge incoming attacks and react quickly to oncoming danger. Stasis and kinesis is easier to use, encouraging me to vary my assaults. Sure, it didn't have the intrigue of the first game, but it was still Dead Space. There was still plenty of dismembering necromorphs, upgrading the almighty plasma cutter, and admiring the environmental work. Unfortunately, this new wave of acceptance faded once Chapter 10 got underway, and I found myself revisiting the USG Ishimura. Walking through those hallways reminded me of how memorable the abandoned ship is. I knew it from top to bottom. That sense of place was completely lacking from my entire Dead Space 2 playthrough. The sprawl was just a series of unconnected corridors and rooms, one after the other. Stepping foot onto that ship once again highlighted the fact that except for the school, I had forgotten every other part of Dead Space 2's world. When I was instructed to leave the Ishimura to carry on with the game, a feeling of melancholy washed over me. That ship and the initial mystery of what happened on it from the first game is more interesting than anything that has occurred thus far in the second. Learning the ins and outs of that place, knowing where I was at all times, and feeling like the Ishimura was not just a series of levels, but a real ship is a vital part of buying into that world. The sprawl, in comparison, feels hollow. It is not a place that I had any sort of connection to. I tried to carry on with Dead Space 2, but none of it seemed to matter. The story had long since become irrelevant, mainly because I had no interest in it. What remained was tight gameplay, but it felt pointless. Isaac had become an action hero in an action game instead of an everyman trying to survive, reminding me how different this was from the first game. Once again despondent about Dead Space 2, I could go no further. For the second time, I quit. It sat on the shelf for a couple of years, completely forgotten. In that time, Dead Space 3 came out and it seemed to double up on action. It amazed me how much the series had changed. They had something that I felt was truly special, and instead of pursuing it, the series had devolved into just another shooter. Then at some point in 2014, while making an effort to go through my backlog, I arrived at Dead Space 2. There were only a few chapters left after all, why not finish it? Enough time had passed, allowing my strong feelings to dissipate. I was able to view Dead Space 2 for what it was, a pretty good action game with tight controls but with a story, setting and character that didn't hold my attention. Finally finishing it 3 years after first playing was not satisfying but disheartening. At that moment, for all I knew, it was the closing chapter on my time with Dead Space. I had no intention of revisiting it. So what changed? How come not only did I go back, I also got the Platinum Trophy? Two reasons. First is starting the video series Platinum Journey. Second is the enticing challenge of platinuming Dead Space 2. After documenting getting a platinum in Ratchet & Clank A Crack in Time, Uncharted 2, Bioshock Infinite and The Last of Us, I realised that the series is at its best and most entertaining when there is a legitimate and arduous challenge present. The Ratchet & Clank episode was a bad idea. Its platinum difficulty rating is only 3 out of 10. Watching it back highlights just how little substance there is to that journey. My favourite was The Last of Us, as it was genuinely hard to get the platinum trophy and it showed in the video. So if I was going to invest 100+ hours into making an episode, I wanted it to be as good as possible. There has to be ups and downs in order for that to be the case. I needed hard platinum trophies. So when looking at the games available to me and their platinum difficulty, one stuck out above all the others. Dead Space 2 with its rating of 8 out of 10. By comparison, The Last of Us's platinum difficulty is 6 out of 10. I was torn. On one hand, Dead Space 2 is the most disappointing game in my collection that I never planned on going back to, but on the other hand, it would probably be the best episode of Platinum Journey yet. After mulling it over for a week, I came to the conclusion that the gameplay in Dead Space 2 is pretty good. As I said before, it's a solid action game, but everything else is what bothered me. If I go back in just focusing on the gameplay and understanding that it is not and will never be like the first game, then maybe I could get through it. Add on the allure of a potentially fantastic episode of Platinum Journey and my mind was made up. I'd be doing something that I never planned on. Replaying Dead Space 2. In order to complete it 100%, I'll be doing 4 playthroughs. Twice on easy, once on hardcore and once on very hard. That first run on easy was strange, playing through it with fresh eyes that could take note of some of the positives of the game. It looks fantastic even years later, the sound design is excellent, gameplay is tight, using stasis and kinesis more often is encouraged, helping add an extra layer to combat. After a few hours, even I had to admit, blasting necromorphs was fun. Seeing them splatter and limbs fly about gave me a morbid pleasure. I was finally able to separate expectation from reality. Then during the hardcore mode playthrough, I learned just how good the combat can be when resources are at a minimum. Using stasis and kinesis effectively is one of the keys to survival. Getting careless with ammo can easily make things a constant uphill struggle. Of course, there was a few moments during that run where I questioned my sanity for even considering continuing. Dying in this room for a second time meant that I would have to go back and do it all over again. It filled me with more rage than I had ever experienced in any game ever. My hands are shaking with fury! But I persevered and finally, after 16 infuriating hours, beat hardcore mode. It felt like I just fought a war against Dead Space 2, from which I emerged victorious. The hand cannon was unlocked in the store, making enemies for my final playthrough a non-issue. During that run, all my residual anger came bubbling to the surface. This is not a beloved game of mine like The Last of Us. It is Dead Space 2, a game that changed all that made the first one special. On top of that, it had tortured me with hardcore mode, forcing a trek through the same chapters over and over again. With the hand cannon by my side, I destroyed every necromorph in sight, allowing myself to go a little mad. It is retribution! I found the whole thing rather cathartic. When the dust settled, a platinum trophy was unlocked. It took me a couple of days to process my feelings about the entire ordeal. One thing was crystal clear. It was certainly going to make for an excellent episode of Platinum Journey. But after spending 40 hours over 5 playthroughs, did I actually like Dead Space 2? No. I can admit that it is worthy of the critical praise. Most outlets give it 8s and 9s, and I understand why. Isaac is faster and more responsive, making the player feel like a badass as they blast through hundreds of enemies. The locations visited are more varied than the first game, and for some, the story of a man battling mental demons is appealing. But I preferred when Isaac controlled like an everyman with his movement at times sluggish. I liked having less enemies, allowing the tension to build in between encounters. Sure, the areas may be more varied, but they felt unconnected. I never knew where I was, instead just following an objective marker. No matter how interesting Isaac's story may be, it can never top the feeling of it being my story, like I was the one trapped facing grotesque monsters while trying to survive. So in the end, while I know Dead Space 2 is a good, maybe even great game, and I don't fault anyone for liking it, but because of the change it made from its predecessor, which I adore, even after spending 40 hours over 5 playthroughs, I still don't like Dead Space 2. 4 years, 40 hours, 5 playthroughs, still don't like it. What a cheery way to end the video. Thank you very much for watching. By all means, let me know what you think of the Dead Space series in the comments down below. And until next time, take care.